This is our 2007 Toyota Yaris, and today I'll show you how to replace the front brake pads and rotors. Brake pads can last a long time or a short time, depending on your car and your driving habits, but disc brakes are supposed to start squeaking when the pads are on their last legs. That didn't exactly happen this time. Instead, we were making deliveries in this car with no problems when we almost got stuck on a really washed out gravel road. The front right tire was spinning fast, flinging rocks and dirt everywhere for a moment or two. And as soon as I got the car turned around, the brakes started grinding really bad on that same wheel, and it felt like a rock had gotten stuck between one of the brake pads and the brake rotor. We drove it like that for the rest of the day, and when we got home, I took off the wheel to look at the brakes, and here's what I found.
I'm surprised it's not way hotter.
You can see where it's turning blue. It got really hot.
There weren't any rocks, but the inner brake pad had worn completely through the friction material and was scraping the shit out of the rotor every time we used the brakes. You can't just put a new brake pad on this or it's gonna wear out really fast. So now we needed pads and one new rotor. Unfortunately, we had to keep driving it like this for a few more days before we could afford new parts, because our kitten had just broken its leg, which was an unexpected $500 just to start, so driving this thing was pretty embarrassing. And just for the record, the lowest prices I found were $43 for a set of front brake pads and $50 for one front brake rotor from our favorite store with the best customer service.
We made it.
Anyway, this is actually a very simple job when you have everything you need, so let's get to it. Here are the tools that I used for this job. Impact wrench, torque wrench, 21mm socket, 13mm socket, 3-inch socket extension, 17mm wrench, 17mm ratcheting wrench, 14mm wrench, needle nose pliers, flathead screwdriver, really old plastic mallet, a digital caliper, a brake caliper compression tool, and a floor jack. For this job I also needed a rolling stool, a light, padded gloves, rubber gloves, a bungee cord, disc brake caliper lube, an M8 bolt, shop towels, brake cleaner, something to chock the wheels, a new brake rotor, and a new set of front brake pads. There are links in the description for everything I used. I'll start by chocking the wheel diagonal from the wheel I'm working on. I jacked up one corner of the car at a time, using this point behind each wheel, but you could also raise both front wheels at once by jacking up the car from this point. Since I'm not getting under the car, I chose not to use any jack stands. Pull off the hubcap, if there is one, and remove the lug nuts with a 21mm socket. If you're not using an impact wrench, you'll need to loosen the lug nuts before you jack up the car. If the wheel is stuck, I always try to break it free by going around the edge with a plastic mallet. Just be careful not to bend the wheel and use a rag to protect the paint if you need to. Here's the new rotor we bought. And these are the new brake pads. All 4 brake pads for this car are identical, so you don't have to worry about which one goes where. To access the brake pads, I removed this bolt with a 14mm wrench. You may need a second 14mm wrench to hold the slide pin from spinning. The piston will need to be compressed back into the caliper before the new brake pads will fit, but first, we need to start keeping an eye on the brake fluid reservoir. When compressing each piston, a small amount of brake fluid will be forced back up the line and into the reservoir. The brake fluid reservoir could overflow, especially if you're doing all 4 brakes, and brake fluid is pretty corrosive, so I'll check the level after compressing each brake and remove any excess fluid with a turkey baster or a syringe. Just for fun, let's measure the thickness of the new pads compared to the old ones. These brake wear indicators, or squealer clips, need to be transferred from the old brake pads to the new ones. I couldn't find much information about this type of squealer clip, not even in the service manual, but they sure didn't work when they were installed on the leading edge of the old pads, so I'll be putting them on the trailing edge of the new pads. I think that makes more sense considering the design of these clips, but leave a comment if you happen to be a squealer clip engineer.
This squealer clip, or whatever you call it, that came off of the really bad brake pad, it's a little damaged. It's it's a little worn there, and I think this clip maybe got broken off or something because I can't get it to clip on to the new pad. It just, maybe I need to bend it a little bit more or something. But this one went on pretty easily. Let me see, maybe you can see that little finger in there. It seems longer than this one, so something maybe happened to that. I'm not sure.
I'm pretty sure what actually happened is that I pulled off the clip the wrong way and bent that little finger myself. I think if I had stuck the needle nose pliers through and then twisted out this way, they would have come off a lot easier without being damaged.
This clip is probably just trash. We'll just throw that one away. We'll keep the good one, and we'll just have one on one side. For some reason, the brake pads don't come with new squealer clips. Is that what you call these things? I feel like that's what you call these things. Anyway, the way this works is that it fits on there, and then once the brake pad gets worn down to the level of the clip, this will start grinding against the brake rotor surface, and it makes a really loud squeal or squeaking noise. And that's how most people know when it's time to get new brakes, before it actually gets down to this part, because now we need a new rotor because this ground up the rotor really bad. I'll show you that in a minute.
First, let's relubricate the slide pins, which should be done every time the brakes are serviced. We've already made the upper pin accessible, but you'll have to remove the lower 14mm bolt that's still holding the brake caliper in place to access the other pin. Just wipe off the old gunk and apply some fresh disc brake caliper lube. When you reinstall the slide pins, make sure to fully secure the rubber boots.
The brake rotor rotates this way, so you want the squealer at the bottom so that the brake rotor goes this way against it. So this pad will have to be on that side, and if I had a squealer for the other pad, it would be at the bottom on this side.
More brake caliper lubricant can be applied to the areas where the brake pads slide into the caliper. Then, install the new pads as shown and close the brake caliper.
You'll have to push this in.
This bolt should be torqued to 25 foot-pounds, but I just made sure to get it nice and tight. To access the brake rotor, the brake caliper mounting bracket needs to be removed. Each one is secured with two 17mm bolts. I used a bungee cord to hold it out of the way. The brake rotor is rusted to the hub, so I tried knocking it free with a plastic mallet, which usually works, but it just wasn't this time.
That is rusted on. Well, there's little holes there where you can put a bolt. Yeah, those are threaded.
I figured I only needed one bolt, but I grabbed two just in case.
These are a couple M8 bolts that I found, and they should fit in here. You tighten them both up, and that will push the rotor off of the wheel bearing or whatever is behind there. That was easy. Can you see the grooves? Yikes. So here's the new rotor and the old rotor. If we look at the back of the old one, we can see that it was highly worn out by this brake pad. Look how much thinner that ground down side is compared to the good side. Let's measure these. About 7mm. About 5mm. And the good side is still... So, oh, these are thicker from the factory. Unless the rust is making them appear thicker. These new rotors come with a thin layer of grease. You might not see it or feel it, but it's there to keep it from rusting. So we have to clean that off first using some brake cleaner. This is what I use. This is what I've always used. Not endorsing this brand or whatever, but this stuff works really good. So let's get to it. Use it in a well-ventilated area.
By the way, you can now support the channel by purchasing this awesome design available in a t-shirt, long sleeve, and a hoodie, and in a bunch of different colors as well. Check for a link in the description below. Some brake rotors are directional, but these ones are not. Here's an example of some directional brake rotors that I installed on my friend's Corvette. These brake rotors are directional, but you don't go by the orientation of the slots or the drill holes. You need to make sure the curved inner vanes are oriented so that they lean toward the rear of the car. These are not designed to scoop air toward the hub, they're designed to fling hot air away from the hub. If the vanes in the brake rotors are not slanted, the rotors can be installed in either orientation, but the orientation of the slots and the holes on the face of the rotor don't make any difference. I should have applied a thin layer of waterproof grease to the areas where the rotor contacts the hub, which would help keep it from getting rusted in place again, but I guess I got lazy and decided the bolt trick worked good enough. If you do apply grease to the hub, be careful not to get any on the brake rotor or on the threads for the lug nuts. The brake caliper is all that holds the rotor in place until the wheel is on.
Don't forget to pull your bungee cords out. I've done that before and then found the bungee cord up there months later. Luckily, nothing bad ever happened.
The 2 bolts that secure the brake caliper mounting bracket should be torqued to 79 foot-pounds, but I just made sure to get them real tight. I could probably fit a torque wrench in here if I turn the steering wheel, but you can't do that with the rear wheels, so I've just gotten used to tightening these bolts by feel. The lug nuts on this car should be torqued to 76 foot-pounds. By the way, don't forget to check on your brake fluid reservoir.
Oh, that's pretty full. You might suck some out. I'm gonna pump the brakes a few times first.
You'll need to pump the brakes before driving either way to push the pistons and the brake calipers out, or else you won't have any braking power, so make sure not to skip this step.
On a side note, if you know why the brakes squeak every time I release the pedal, please leave a comment. It's driving us nuts. And after pumping the brakes, we got the fluid level down almost to the appropriate level. I might still want to suck some out. I'm not sure what bad things could happen if I leave it that much over full, but I'm tempted to find out.
When everything is installed, remove your wheel chocks and grab your keys because it's time to bed in the new brakes. Bedding in the brakes is an important step in getting your brakes to function their best, which most people don't do. Basically, we'll get the brakes really hot so that some of the pad material bonds to the rotor. This will help the brakes last longer and work significantly better. It's especially important to do when mixing new pads with used rotors because the new pads will have a perfectly flat surface and the used rotors almost definitely will not. So here's the general procedure. First of all, during the procedure, you never want to come to a complete stop because the pads could actually melt to the rotors. And make sure not to brake hard enough to lock up the tires or trigger the ABS. Step 1. Find a road with nobody around. Step 2. Get the brakes warm by quickly decelerating from 35 to 5 miles per hour 3 times in a row. Step 3. Get the brakes hot by quickly decelerating from 50 to 5 miles an hour 5 times in a row. Step 4. Drive for 5 minutes without using the brakes much if possible to let them cool down. And that's it. Leave a comment if you want me to make a video on flushing the brake fluid in this car, which will help get your Yaris stopping better than new. And before you go, check out my latest video where we decided to stop changing the oil in this car altogether, and after 18,000 miles, I sent an oil sample to a lab for analysis. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe for more of the best DIY videos on the internet. And until next time, just keep throwing money at it.